When I was 21, my partner Elena and I rented my family's old cabin on the edge of a remote village in Eastern Europe. It was the middle of winter. A vicious snowstorm raged outside while we huddled together on the worn couch beside a crackling heater, watching late-night television. The cabin, isolated amidst endless, frost-covered woods, was guarded only by a rickety wooden door with a broken lock. My grandfather had once propped a few cinder blocks against that door as a feeble barrier. That night, as we sat lost in our own world, Elena suddenly began trembling and whispered that she'd heard something outside. I brushed it off, suggesting it was likely a stray animal. But moments later, her eyes widened as she repeated that eerie sound. I muted the television to listen more closely. It resembled the clumsy, unnerving shuffling of someone or something moving around in the small shed near our car, its lights left on deliberately. If someone was out there, they knew we were inside. Elena urged me to investigate, but I convinced her it was nothing more than our imaginations. The noise then ceased, leaving only the howling storm as our companion. After a few tense minutes, I gathered enough nerve to switch off the cabin lights and pull back the heavy blinds. Outside, in the dim glow of the porch light, I noticed fresh footprints in the snow, clearly human, not animal, and they led toward the back of the property. Curiosity and dread warred within me as I moved to open the curtains of the rear window. At that moment, I felt a surge of terror so intense that I nearly screamed. Elena did, her cry echoing off the frozen landscape. Through the darkened window, we saw a man clad entirely in black, his face obscured by a sinister mask, staring directly at us. I slammed the blinds shut and ordered Elena to hide in the bedroom. My heart pounding, I retrieved an old hunting rifle from the closet and hastily piled cinder blocks and other heavy objects against the door to form a makeshift barricade. I shut every window and light, then crouched with Elena in the far corner of the bedroom. Not long after, a violent bang rattled the front door, a forceful attempt to break it down. I could barely discern if he even touched the knob, but the relentless pounding made it clear. He was determined to get in. After several futile blows, the intruder finally abandoned his assault. I remained awake through that long, harrowing night, with the rifle clutched in my hands while Elena fitfully slept. At dawn, we packed our belongings and fled. But as we left, I noticed one final chilling detail: a fresh trail of footprints leading from the front window out into the silent, snow-laden woods. To this day, I avoid that forsaken cabin. Even my grandparents, who have since returned, found no evidence of any break-in or missing items. That night left an indelible mark on my soul, a reminder that some horrors hide in the shadows, waiting for the next unwary visitor. Back when my grandma was still alive, I used to walk down the block to her house every day to help with various chores. One wintry evening, I went over at my usual time and found the door unexpectedly unlocked, even though Grandma was known for her extreme caution and always kept everything bolted. I noticed that her bedroom door upstairs was left open, and I could faintly hear the sounds of drawers and cabinets being moved. I climbed the creaking staircase, calling out for her, but just as I reached the door, it slammed shut. I knocked, asking if everything was all right, when suddenly my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed Grandma's number. Confused, I answered, and her voice came through in a hurried whisper, telling me not to come over that day because she was on her way to her seniors club. My heart pounded as I ended the call before she could continue. In that chilling moment, I realized something was terribly wrong. Pretending to play dumb, I told her I'd be downstairs, but then I quickly made my way to the kitchen. With trembling hands, I grabbed a knife and dialed 911. The silence, coming from the upstairs bedroom, was unnerving. Moments later, the police burst into the room, and the sudden bang of a gunshot startled me. When the paramedics arrived and wheeled out the intruder, I recognized his face. It was our next-door neighbor. Apparently, when Grandma had left, he had broken in to search for jewelry. The police found him hiding next to the door, clutching a large knife. I shudder to think that if I had walked into that bedroom, I might have been as good as dead. One of the most harrowing experiences of my life unfolded on a bitter, bleak evening. My wife Lydia and I had just returned from a modest dinner at a roadside diner on the outskirts of Ravenswood. As we stepped from our car into the chill night, a sudden, unsettling realization struck me. Our heavy oak door was left wide open, standing as a silent portent against the inky sky. Without a moment's hesitation, I instructed Lydia to remain outside while I dashed into the house. My heart pounded as I raced up the creaking staircase toward the bedroom, where I had secreted away our old shotgun. With trembling hands, I loaded the weapon and began a meticulous search of every room on the upper floor. I combed the dim corners, scrutinized every shadow, yet found no trace of anyone. The oppressive silence that enveloped the space only deepened my apprehension. Determined to leave no stone unturned, I retraced my steps back down to the main floor. I inspected each room with a mounting sense of dread, and even ventured into the dark, damp basement, a place filled with a musty odor of decay. Every detail appeared undisturbed. Nothing was missing or out of place. The unnerving calm suggested that if an intruder had been here, they had left as silently as they'd come. Without delay, I called the local police, recounting every unsettling detail as they arrived to investigate. The officers carefully examined the upstairs corridors, narrow hallways, and labyrinthine cellar. In soft, measured tones, they questioned whether we were absolutely sure we had locked the door when we left. Although a sliver of doubt crept into my mind, Lydia remained steadfast in her belief that we had secured it properly. The police concluded that if someone had slipped in, they must have fled swiftly, leaving no obvious trace behind. Later that night, Lydia's distress reached a breaking point. Tears streamed down her face as she insisted she couldn't bear to stay inside the house. I did everything in my power to comfort her, assuring her that whoever had broken in must have departed long ago. Despite my reassurances, the stillness of our home offered no solace. After endless hours of restless tossing in our creaking bed, I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be rudely awakened by a blood-curdling scream from Lydia. I sprang from the bed and saw her standing, fixated on a dark closet at the end of the hall. In that heart-stopping moment, it struck me that I had forgotten to inspect the second closet. My pulse raced as I moved cautiously toward it. Peering into its shadowy recess, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a gaunt face, a contorted visage emerging for just an instant before the closet door slammed shut with a resounding bang. Instinctively, I raised the loaded shotgun and bellowed for the intruder to step into view. The door creaked open again, but instead of appearing, the man made a mad dash for the front door, vanishing into the dense darkness. I never found it in myself to pursue him. In retrospect, I believe that arming myself that night spared us from a fate far more dreadful than I could ever imagine. About a year ago, while I was still living in my family's creaking old manor on the outskirts of town, I began to experience unsettling events in my bedroom. One late night, as I lay awake, I heard a slow creak coming from the other side of the room. To my shock, the wardrobe door had inexplicably swung open. Despite being well into my 30s, I instinctively peered inside, half expecting to find someone hidden in its cramped interior. There was nothing, so I closed the door and tried to dismiss the incident as a mere trick of my tired mind. Later that same night, a series of low, rattling sounds echoed from above the ceiling, as if something was skittering through the air ducts. The strange noise left me puzzled, yet when it finally ceased, I drifted off into a fitful sleep. The next morning I mentioned the odd sounds from the attic to my father, but he brushed off my account as the ramblings of an overactive imagination. That evening, as I lay awake, lost in thought, the slow creak of the wardrobe door breaking the silence startled me once again. This time, a deep fear gripped me. I was certain the door had been firmly shut, and it would have required someone to twist the knob to force it open. I examined the small closet carefully, convinced that no one could possibly hide in such a confined space. I tried to rationalize the event as a malfunctioning doorknob, yet soon after, the same rattling sounds emerged from above, mirroring the mysterious disturbance from the night before. Determined to find an explanation, I convinced my father to inspect the closet the following morning. With a casual tug, he confirmed that the door was secure, offering the explanation that I must have inadvertently left it unlatched. But I knew with absolute certainty that I had closed it properly. That night, I lay in bed, steeling myself for another inexplicable occurrence. Right on cue, the wardrobe door creaked open once more. I listened intently for the familiar rattles overhead, but all that greeted me was a heavy, unnerving silence. With trembling hands, I switched on my bedside lamp and cast my gaze toward the air vent. To my horror, I saw two wide, unblinking eyes staring back at me from the dark interior of the vent. I screamed at the top of my lungs. My parents burst into the room, questioning whether I had lost my sanity. I recounted every detail, but they exchanged doubtful glances, dismissing my experience as nothing more than a vivid dream brought on by sleep deprivation. Even now, I know what I saw wasn't a mere figment of my imagination. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural, yet those 3 nights, marked by the mysterious opening of a wardrobe, the relentless rattling from above, and the horrifying gaze from within an air vent, remain an enigma I cannot explain. I live in Blackwood Marsh with my wife Eleanor and our 2 children, Mia and Oliver. Just a short walk from our home lies a modest lake, a place that for years served as our cherished family retreat. Until last Saturday, that serene haven was our escape from everyday life. Now, its placid waters have become a nightmare I dare not revisit. That fateful afternoon began like any other summer outing. We packed a few foldable chairs and spread a worn blanket along the sandy shore, transforming a secluded patch of the lake into our own private beach. Eleanor and I settled into our chairs beneath a blazing sky, while Mia and Oliver frolicked at the water's edge. I'd often warned them not to stray too far. After all, they were only 6 and 8, but their laughter drowned out caution as they splashed and built sandcastles in the fading light. After 2 hours of carefree play, the heat and the lull of the gentle waves prompted Eleanor to return home. I decided to linger a while longer, confident that my kids were safe under the watch of the bright, sinking sun. Yet as dusk deepened, I began noticing subtle shifts in the scene. The children, caught up in their games, started drifting farther from the shore, their silhouettes merging with the darkening water. When I called out, my words seemed to vanish into the twilight. Rising from my seat, I moved closer to the water's edge, intent on corralling them back to safety. That's when I saw it, a shadowy, round object drifting slowly toward them. It was a formless, jet-black shape that defied any natural explanation. Heart pounding, I sprinted into the shallow water, my voice cracking as I desperately called their names. By the time I reached them and dragged them back to dry land, the mysterious shape had melted into the inky water, leaving Mia and Oliver wide-eyed and trembling with confusion. We gathered our things and trudged back home in a heavy silence. At dinner, every bite I took was laced with dread. The memory of that unexplainable presence haunted me. Eleanor noticed my distracted manner and asked what was wrong, but the terror I felt was too raw to share. Instead, I ate slowly, each chew a battle against the nagging thought of that inexplicable menace. Unable to shake the memory, after dinner I snuck a small flashlight from our bedside drawer and returned to the lake. The night had swallowed the landscape in impenetrable darkness. My hands trembled as I scanned the water with the narrow beam of light, searching for any sign of that black object. Just then, a deep splash shattered the silence, like something enormous breaking the surface. I froze as the light revealed a tall, ominous silhouette. It stood motionless in the water, its long, raven-black hair obscuring any hint of a face. The figure fixed its gaze on me. It didn't grin or frown, merely existed as a silent threat. In that moment, my terror was absolute. I fumbled with the flashlight until it slipped from my grasp and plunged into the dark waters. Without a second thought, I turned and bolted back to the house, my pounding heart urging me on as I slammed the door shut behind me. Now, every creak in the night and every rustle outside fills me with a bone-deep fear that the creature might still be lurking, perhaps even watching me through the window at this very moment. I haven't spoken of that night to anyone. The thought that this presence might return, that it could be hidden just a quarter-mile away from the sanctuary of my home, continues to haunt me. Every shadow seems imbued with menace, every ripple in the water a reminder of that silent, watching horror.